Brio English Podcast.
Laugh, learn, love English. Think about the most successful person you've ever met. Not famous necessarily, just genuinely successful. Someone who has built something real, led people effectively, made things happen, created something that mattered. Now think about how they speak. Not what they talk about, how they speak. The specific words they choose, the pace they use, the way they frame difficult things, the way they make you feel when you're in a conversation with them. I want you to really think about this for a moment.
I'm thinking about it right now, actually. The most impressive person I've worked with, a senior leader at a company I was at a few years ago. And you're right, there was something about the way she spoke that was different. It wasn't just confidence. It wasn't just authority. It was something more deliberate. Like every word had been considered before it came out. Like she never said something she didn't mean to say.
That deliberateness, that careful, intentional relationship with language is not accidental. It's not a personality trait you're born with. It's a set of habits, specific, learnable, practicable habits that the most effective communicators in the world share across cultures, across industries, across languages. And today we're going to go through every single one of them.
I want to push back slightly on one thing before we start, because I think some people listening might feel, well, I'm learning English as a second language. These advanced communication habits feel like they're for people who already speak English perfectly. Is this relevant for someone who is still building their English?
That is exactly the right question to ask. And the answer is, this is more relevant for English learners than for almost anyone else. Here's why. When you speak in a second language, you're already working harder than a native speaker. Your brain is doing translation work, grammar checking, pronunciation monitoring, all simultaneously. So you have less mental bandwidth available for the higher level communication habits we're talking about today.
Which means English learners who develop these habits, who make them automatic, actually have a significant advantage, because their communication becomes more effective at a level beyond grammar and vocabulary.
Exactly. And here's something that might genuinely surprise you. Research consistently shows that the most powerful communicators in the world use simpler language than average. Not more complex, simpler, more direct, more precise. So the assumption that advanced communication means advanced vocabulary, that assumption is completely wrong. Advanced communication means advanced habits, and habits are available to everyone.
I love that. Advanced habits, not advanced vocabulary. Let's go through every single one. I'm Maya, he's Alex, and this is Brio English Podcast.
Before we get into the specific habits, I want to make a case for why this matters so deeply. Because some people think, words are just words. What really matters is the quality of your ideas, your work ethic, your intelligence. The specific words you use to wrap those things in, surely that's secondary.
I think a lot of people feel that, especially in professional contexts, like, judge me by my results, not by how I phrase things.
And I understand that instinct completely. But here's the reality. Your words are not just a wrapper for your ideas. They are the vehicle through which your ideas enter other people's minds. If the vehicle is clunky and unclear, your brilliant idea arrives damaged. If the vehicle is smooth and precise, your idea arrives intact and compelling. The quality of your communication directly determines how much of your actual capability other people perceive.
So you could be extraordinarily talented and capable, but if your communication habits are weak, people will consistently underestimate you.
It happens constantly. I've seen it personally. People who are genuinely brilliant, whose thinking is exceptional, but who communicate with uncertainty and excessive hedging and vague language. And they get overlooked. Passed over for promotion, not taken seriously in meetings, not because of their intelligence or capability, but because their language doesn't reflect it.
That's quite painful to think about, actually. People's careers being held back not by their ability, but by their communication habits.
And the good news, the genuinely great news, is that communication habits are completely changeable. Unlike intelligence, which is relatively fixed, unlike experience which takes years to accumulate, communication habits can change in weeks, sometimes in days. I've seen people completely transform how they're perceived in a professional environment by making 3 or 4 specific language changes. The impact is immediate and dramatic.
That's why this topic matters so much. It's not abstract self-improvement. It's direct practical impact on your career, your relationships, your life. Right now, starting today.
Exactly. And I want to say one more thing before we start the habits. These habits work in every language, not just English. The principles of clear, confident, generous communication are universal. But we're going to explore them specifically through English, because English has some unique characteristics that make these habits particularly important and particularly powerful. Ready?
Absolutely ready.
Habit 1. And I want to start here because it might be the most counterintuitive of everything we cover today. The most successful communicators in the world do not try to impress with their language. They try to be understood. They consistently choose the simplest, clearest word available, not the most impressive one, not the most technical one, not the one that signals their education level, the one that will be understood most immediately and most completely.
That genuinely surprises me. I would have assumed that successful people, leaders, CEOs, public speakers, would use sophisticated language to signal their authority and intelligence. That's what I was taught to do in formal education. Use impressive vocabulary, write complex sentences, show that you know a lot of words.
Most people are taught exactly that, and it creates a very common and very costly mistake, using complexity to signal competence. The reasoning goes, if I use impressive vocabulary, people will think I'm intelligent. But here's what actually happens in the listener's brain when you speak in complex, unclear language. Their cognitive load, the mental effort they need to process what you're saying, increases. And when they're working hard to understand you, they're spending less mental energy on actually engaging with your ideas.
So complexity creates distance rather than impression.
Exactly. And there's a name for this, the curse of knowledge. Once you understand something deeply, it becomes genuinely difficult to remember what it was like not to understand it. Experts fall into this trap constantly. They communicate in ways that make perfect sense to other experts, but completely lose everyone else. And the irony is, the ability to take a genuinely complex idea and express it in language that anyone can immediately understand requires more intelligence than using complicated language. It's much harder to be clear than to be complex.
So clarity is actually the more impressive achievement. When someone explains something complicated in a way that makes it suddenly simple, that's when you think, wow, they really understand this.
Exactly right. There's a quote often attributed to Einstein. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Whether he actually said it or not, the principle is absolutely true. The ability to simplify is the mark of genuine mastery. In practical terms, this habit means consistently choosing shorter words over longer ones when they mean the same thing. Use instead of utilize. Help instead of facilitate. Show instead of demonstrate. Start instead of commence. Get instead of obtain. Need instead of require. Every single time.
I am absolutely guilty of using utilize, facilitate, and commence in professional emails. I genuinely thought they made me sound more competent and professional. And you're telling me the simpler versions are actually stronger choices.
Always. And let me give you a real example. I would like to utilize this opportunity to facilitate a discussion regarding the implementation of our new procedures versus I'd like to use this chance to talk about how we start the new process. Same information. The second version is clearer, faster to read, easier to understand. And it actually sounds more confident because it doesn't feel like it's trying to impress anyone.
The first version sounds like it's performing intelligence. The second version sounds like actual intelligence.
That's a perfect way to put it. And this applies especially powerfully in English because English has a very interesting dual vocabulary. It has both Anglo-Saxon words which tend to be short, direct and concrete, and Latin and French-derived words which tend to be longer and more formal. Start, commence, help, facilitate, end, terminate, ask, inquire. The Anglo-Saxon word is almost always more direct and more powerful in everyday communication.
So when in doubt, choose the shorter word. Choose the older word. Choose the one that feels more natural when spoken aloud. That's almost always the stronger choice.
Precisely. Test your writing and your speaking by asking, could a 12-year-old understand this immediately? If yes, you're communicating well. If not, simplify. Habit 2, and this surprises people every single time without fail. The most successful communicators are not necessarily the most talkative people in the room. They are frequently, not always but frequently, the best listeners. The ones who speak least, but whose words land with the most weight.
I want to push back on this one, because we admire great speakers, great orators, people who can hold a room. Surely speaking brilliantly is the core skill, not listening?
Speaking brilliantly is a skill, absolutely. But it's a performance skill, and performance only happens in certain moments. Listening is a constant skill that operates in every single interaction, every meeting, every conversation, every negotiation, every relationship. And the most effective leaders I've ever studied and read about are consistently described by the people around them as extraordinary listeners, not extraordinary speakers.
Why does listening create such a strong impression? What's actually happening when someone listens really well?
Several things simultaneously. First, when someone genuinely listens to you, not waiting for their turn to speak but actually processing what you're saying, you feel it. You feel valued. You feel that what you're saying matters, and that feeling creates instant connection and trust. Second, the person who listens well gathers enormous amounts of information. They understand the room. They understand what people actually think rather than what people say they think. And when they finally speak, they speak from a position of real knowledge.
There's a difference between hearing someone and actually listening to them, isn't there? Most people in conversations are already planning their response while the other person is still talking. Their body is present, but their mind has moved on.
And people feel that too. They can sense when you've stopped listening and started preparing. It's subtle, but it's real. Active listening, genuinely staying present with what someone is saying until they've completely finished, is rarer than you might think. And when you encounter it, when someone genuinely listens to everything you've said before responding, it's a remarkable feeling.
So what does active listening actually look like in practice? What are the specific language habits of a great listener?
4 specific things. First, they ask questions that could only be asked by someone who is genuinely listening. Not generic questions, specific ones that pick up on exactly what was said. You mentioned earlier that the timeline was the main concern. Can you tell me more about what's specifically driving that? That question requires the listener to have actually processed and remembered what was said. You can't fake it.
And it signals to the speaker, I heard you. Not just the words, but the meaning behind them. That feeling is incredibly powerful.
Second habit of great listeners, they reflect back what they've heard before responding. So if I understand correctly, your main concern isn't the cost, but the timing. Is that right? This does 2 things. It confirms that they've understood correctly, preventing misunderstanding. And it gives the speaker a chance to clarify or add to what they said before the conversation moves on. It slows everything down in a way that actually makes communication faster and more effective.
Third, and this one is subtle but incredibly powerful, they use the other person's exact words back to them rather than substituting their own. If someone says, I'm feeling overwhelmed by this project, a great listener says overwhelmed. Tell me more about that, rather than changing it to, so you're stressed about it, or so you're finding it difficult. Using their exact word shows complete respect for how they've chosen to describe their own experience.
That's such an important point, Maya. When you substitute your word for theirs, even a synonym, you're subtly telling them that your way of describing it is better than theirs. Using their exact word says, I heard you exactly as you meant to be heard. Nothing has been filtered or reinterpreted.
And fourth, they're comfortable with silence after someone finishes speaking. They don't immediately jump in. They pause, they consider, and that pause communicates something incredibly powerful. What you just said was important enough that I need a moment to think about it before I respond. That's the opposite of what most people do. which is fill every silence as fast as possible.
The pause before speaking is one of the most underused and most powerful communication tools available. It signals, this person thinks before they speak. What they say next will be considered not reactive, and considered responses are almost always more impactful than reactive ones. The silence is not empty. It's full of respect for what was just said.
I rush to fill silence constantly. The moment there's a gap, I start talking, whether or not I actually have something valuable to add. And afterwards, I always wish I'd waited a moment longer.
Most people do exactly that. Practice sitting in silence for just 2 or 3 seconds before responding. It feels enormously uncomfortable at first, almost rude. But try it, and watch what happens to how people respond to you. Habit 3. One of the most powerful and least discussed habits of effective communicators. They consistently choose language that includes rather than excludes. That creates a sense of shared purpose and belonging. That makes the people around them feel part of something rather than subject to something.
What does inclusive language actually look like? Give me the most concrete example first.
The most powerful and most concrete example, the shift from I to we. I decided we should change the strategy versus we need to think about our strategy together. One positions the speaker as the authority above everyone else, the decision-maker whom others must follow. The other positions everyone as participants in a shared challenge that affects all of them equally. Same situation. Completely different emotional impact on everyone in the room.
And you're saying genuinely successful leaders, the ones who build loyal teams and lasting organisations, default to we language even when they personally made the decision alone?
Consistently. And the research on this is remarkable. Teams led by people who use we language, who frame challenges as shared rather than directed, outperform teams led by I language leaders on almost every single measure. Collaboration increases, creativity increases, retention increases, loyalty increases. The pronoun you choose has direct measurable impact on team performance. A single word, I versus we, changes how people feel about their work.
That's extraordinary. Such a tiny change with such an enormous impact. What other inclusive language habits do the most effective communicators use?
Using people's names. This sounds almost too simple to mention, but the research on it is overwhelming. Using someone's name in conversation is one of the most powerful signals of respect and genuine attention available to us in language. Dale Carnegie, whose book How to Win Friends and Influence People has sold over 30 million copies and is still being read today, said that a person's name is to them the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Effective communicators remember names and use them, not once, regularly throughout a conversation.
I am genuinely terrible with names. I meet someone and their name disappears from my memory the moment they finish saying it. It's embarrassing, and I know it affects how connected people feel with me.
The trick that actually works: use the name immediately when you hear it. Repeat it back straight away in your response. Hi, I'm Alex. Great to meet you, Alex. I'm Maya. That immediate repetition begins the process of locking it in. Then use it again within the first 2 minutes. By the third use in a conversation, it's in your memory. It feels slightly forced at first, but very quickly it becomes natural. And the effect on the other person is immediate and powerful.
And the but versus and distinction. Can you go deeper on that one? Because I think it's more nuanced than people realise.
But is one of the most powerful words in English, and one of the most dangerous. Psychologically, but functions as an eraser. Everything that comes before but is weakened or cancelled by what comes after. Your presentation was excellent, but the conclusion needed more work. The listener hears the criticism and the praise evaporates. Your presentation was excellent, and I think there's real potential to develop the conclusion even further, and connects the positive with an opportunity. The brain doesn't cancel, it builds.
That is such a small change. One word. But versus and. But I can feel the difference immediately just hearing the two versions. One deflates, one energizes. I'm going to be very conscious of every time I use, but from this moment forward.
Ha! Notice you just used but naturally there. That is such a small change, but I can feel the difference. Completely natural and grammatically correct in that context. The key is using but intentionally, rather than as a default connector. When you're building on someone's idea or giving feedback, choose and. When you genuinely need to contrast two things, but is fine. Intentional versus automatic. That's the difference. Habit 4. One that genuinely separates exceptional communicators from merely good ones. They take complete ownership with their language. They don't deflect. They don't blame. They don't hide behind passive constructions. They speak directly and honestly about their own role in situations, positive and negative, both.
What does ownership language look like in practice? Start with the difficult situation, when something goes wrong.
When something goes wrong, most people instinctively use passive language to create distance from the problem. It's a psychological protection mechanism. Mistakes were made. The project fell behind schedule. There were some issues with the delivery. The communication could have been better. Notice, nobody did anything wrong. Things just happened, passively, without any human being responsible for them.
Mistakes were made. Possibly the most famous phrase in the history of people avoiding accountability. Politicians use it constantly. Senior executives use it in press releases. It means everything went wrong, and I want you to know that I know that while also ensuring you cannot hold me personally responsible for any of it.
Ha! That's a perfect description. And here's the fascinating thing. People see through it immediately, every single time. And it destroys trust rather than protecting it. Because what the listener hears is, this person either doesn't know what went wrong or doesn't have the courage to say it. Either way, they can't be trusted to tell me the truth when things get difficult.
Versus saying directly, I made an error in the forecast. I got this wrong. I take responsibility for this.
Exactly. Compare. Mistakes were made and there were communication issues that affected the outcome versus, I made an error in the initial forecast and I didn't communicate the problem early enough when I saw it developing. That affected the whole team's planning. I'm genuinely sorry for that, and here is specifically what I'm doing to fix it and prevent it happening again. Same situation. Completely different human being speaking. The second person, you trust. The second person, you want on your team.
Taking ownership makes you more trustworthy, not less, even though it feels more vulnerable and more exposed in the moment.
And ownership language applies equally powerfully to positive situations, giving credit to others. The most effective communicators are extraordinarily specific and generous when giving recognition. Not just great job everyone at the end of a meeting, but David, the way you handled that difficult question from the client in Thursday's meeting was exceptional. You stayed completely calm, you acknowledged their concern fully, and you turned it into a positive. That made a real difference to how the whole meeting went. Specific person, specific action, specific moment, specific impact.
That kind of specific recognition, when someone remembers something specific you did and tells you exactly why it mattered, that stays with you, for years sometimes. General praise is nice. Specific recognition is transformative.
And it costs nothing. It takes 30 seconds. And it creates loyalty and motivation that no salary increase or promotion can generate. The most effective leaders I've studied are extraordinarily generous with specific credit. They seem to notice everything good that happens around them, and they name it clearly and publicly. That's a language habit, a practicable, learnable habit. Habit 5, the most sophisticated habit of all, and the one that takes the longest to develop well. Effective communicators are acutely conscious of how they frame things. They understand that the same information, the exact same facts, can land completely differently depending on how it's presented. And they choose their frames with deliberate intention.
Frame. What exactly do you mean by that? Can you explain it before giving examples?
A frame is the context and perspective you put around information. It's the lens you choose for presenting reality. And the frame you choose shapes how the information is received emotionally, before the listener has even consciously processed the content. Classic example from psychology, a medical treatment that has a 90% survival rate versus a treatment with a 10% mortality rate. Identical information presented in two different frames. But people consistently and strongly prefer the treatment with the 90% survival rate, even when they know intellectually that the statistics are exactly the same.
So the frame changes the emotional experience of the information, even when the rational brain knows the information is identical.
Every time. And effective communicators, especially in leadership and in situations where they need to inspire action, consistently choose positive frames, not dishonest ones, not ones that hide difficult realities, but ones that present the full truth in a way that creates energy and possibility rather than fear and paralysis. We have a significant opportunity here that requires us to move quickly, lands differently than we have a serious problem that we need to fix urgently, even if both statements are simultaneously true.
And framing applies to how we talk about other people too. The words we choose to describe someone reveal our frame completely. Calling someone determined versus stubborn, ambitious versus aggressive, detail-oriented versus a perfectionist, confident versus arrogant. Same behaviour, completely different frame, completely different impression created.
And the most important framing habit of all, how you speak about people when they're not in the room. The way you talk about absent people tells everyone present everything they need to know about your character. People who speak generously and charitably about others in their absence, who give people the benefit of the doubt, who choose positive frames for other people's behavior, are trusted completely. People who criticize and diminish others behind their backs create a very different impression. Everyone listening thinks, they probably speak about me the same way when I'm not here.
That's such a powerful observation. How you talk about others when they're absent is probably the single most honest indicator of your character. Because in that moment, there's no social pressure to be kind. The kindness or unkindness you show then is entirely voluntary.
Let's bring all 5 habits together, because individually each one is powerful. Combined, they create a communication style that is genuinely transformative in every area of life.
Habit 1. Speak to be understood, not to impress. Choose clarity always. Shorter words, simpler sentences, the clearest version of every idea.
Habit 2. Listen more than you speak. Be genuinely present. Ask specific questions that show you've processed what was said. Use their exact words. Sit with silence.
Habit 3. Use language that includes we, not I. Use people's names and not but. Make every person in every conversation feel that they belong in it.
Habit 4. Take ownership. Speak directly about your own role in situations. Own mistakes honestly and specifically. Give credit to others generously and precisely.
Habit 5. Frame deliberately. Choose how you present information. Speak generously about absent people. Be intentional with every single word.
5 habits. None requiring perfect English. None requiring an expensive education. All requiring only one thing: the decision to be intentional with language rather than letting words come out automatically. That intention is available to every single person listening right now, in the very next conversation you have.
The next conversation, not someday, not when your English is perfect. The next one, starting today.
Listener challenge. And this week I want you to focus on just one habit. Not all 5, just one. Pick the habit that resonated most strongly with you today. The one where you thought, that's me. That's exactly what I do. That's what I need to change.
If you know you use complex language to impress, habit 1 this week. If you talk more than you listen, habit 2. If you say I when you should say we, habit 3. If you avoid owning mistakes, habit 4. If you frame things negatively or speak poorly about absent people, habit 5.
One habit, 1 week. Be conscious of it in every single conversation. Notice when you slip back into old patterns, without judging yourself for it. Just notice and redirect. And at the end of the week, come back and tell us in the comments which habit you chose, what you noticed, and what, if anything, changed. Did people respond differently? Did you feel different in conversations? Did something shift?
My habit this week is habit 2, listening. I'm going to practice the pause before responding in every conversation. No rushing to fill silence. I'll report back.
Listener comments. And the sports expression hunters from episode 7 came back with extraordinary discoveries.
I cannot wait to hear these. Read them.
First comment. From a listener in Germany. I counted sports expressions for 1 full week in everything I heard. Meetings, films, conversations, podcasts, news. I found 34 separate examples. 34. I had been using most of them for years with absolutely no idea they came from sport. My favorite discovery. My boss says on the ball at least 5 times every single working day. I told him where it came from and he completely refused to believe me. He is still using it every day and still in denial.
Ha! 34 in 1 week, and a boss in complete denial about his own phrases. That is the perfect outcome. Hello to the listener in Germany, and a warm hello to the boss who is absolutely on the ball whether he knows it or not.
Second comment. From a listener in South Africa. I used the phrase "a good innings" for the first time in my life this week when my colleague retired after 30 years at our company. She cried. She said it was the most meaningful thing anyone had said to her about her career. A cricket phrase that I learned from a podcast made a person cry with gratitude on their last day of work. This is why language matters.
This is why language matters. What a beautiful way to say it. That listener understood the emotional depth of that phrase and used it at exactly the right moment with exactly the right person. That is language working at its most powerful and most human level. Thank you for sharing that with us.
And one more, from a listener in the Philippines. I used "step up to the plate" in a work meeting last Tuesday. My British colleagues understood immediately and nodded. My Filipino colleagues had no idea what I meant. So I explained it, and we spent the next 10 minutes talking about where everyday English phrases come from. It was the best and most interesting meeting we have had in months. Thank you for making my working life more interesting and more connected.
One sports phrase turned a regular meeting into the best meeting in months and created genuine connection between colleagues from different cultures. That is the power of understanding your language deeply. We love every single one of these comments.
And that is episode 8 of Brio English podcast, and one of the episodes I'm most proud of us making.
5 habits of the world's most effective communicators. Speak to be understood, not to impress. Listen more than you speak. Use language that includes. Take ownership with your words. Frame everything deliberately.
Pick one habit, 1 week. Come back and tell us what changed, because something will change. We are absolutely certain of that.
Next episode, we are exploring the specific words that make people trust you immediately when they hear them. The language of credibility, the language of warmth, the exact phrases that open doors. In job interviews, in first meetings, in important conversations, in relationships. Words that work before people have even consciously decided they trust you.
That episode is genuinely going to change how you think about trust and language. Until next week, choose your words carefully, listen like it matters, and remember, the most powerful thing you can do in any conversation is make the other person feel completely and genuinely heard. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers!